You know, in government, really there's no more important project than one involving saving lives. And by coincidence, of course, a little over 2 years ago, many of us in this room were out here to celebrate, at that point, the completion of the median barrier, which has already saved lives and prevented many injuries and accidents, and we're very proud of that action. And many of the same people were here, and we celebrated that, and that was a great day at the bridge. Today is also a great day here at the bridge. We're very excited about it. We are just starting. Unfortunately, we're not completing, but starting this project, as many know, and as we'll discuss later today, is a big, big hurdle that we finally overcome. But the advocacy started several years ago on the Deterrent system, a suicide deterrent project, and so forth. We want to acknowledge a few of those people who are here in the audience. And there are an awful lot of you who are involved in this, and I'm not going to be able to mention all of you, but we will mention a few names. First off, we wanted to acknowledge the great efforts of San Francisco suicide prevention under the leadership of Eve Meyer. They've been with us all the way for decades. Eve, please stand up. Yeah. SF Suicide Prevention, and I see John Vidori here also from Suicide Prevention, have been great. Also want to acknowledge the Psychiatric Foundation of Northern California, Dr. Mel Blaustein. Early on, some of you may know this, but in the early days, the board didn't support this project. Dr. Blaustein and many of the advocates started meeting with people and met with almost every board member at that period of time, educating them on suicide prevention and the importance of reducing access to lethal means. And then also, just as important, the Bridge Rail Foundation, founded by Paul Muller, David Hull, Dana Whitmer, with assistance from former Marin County Coroner Ken Holmes, has been very active. So, and a more recent partner with so many, the worst trend about the suicides we've had, as many of you know, is the fact that we've had so many young people the last few years. And as a result, we've resorted to another involvement. We now have the help of young people involved in the crisis text line, and we also thank them for being here. We started that last year. So to those of you who are advocates, and many of you are family members of the victims, we applaud you for your efforts. We would not be here today were it not for you. I can assure you of that, having been on this board for over a decade. And we'd like to applaud your success. We would like all the victims and the advocates to please stand up for just a moment. The families. Thank you very much. We have many important speakers today, very impressive speakers, but we also do need and want to thank a few other organizations and individuals before we get to that, just a few minutes. We will first off want to acknowledge the Golden Gate Bridge staff, their patrols, the front lines. They patrol the front lines every day. Sergeants, patrol officers, lieutenants, roadway service workers, iron workers who go over the rail, all the men and women of labor here at the bridge who are the eyes and ears of the sidewalks. We thank you for your diligent and caring efforts in saving lives. So thank you. We also, here at the bridge, of course, have a tremendous security coalition, and we want to acknowledge their involvement and help over the years, and particularly on this project and as it will be going. The California Highway Patrol, who is our partner on the sidewalks, the San Francisco Police Department, the San Francisco Fire Department, the Sausalito Police Department, Marin County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and Southern Marin Fire. And we also want to acknowledge the very difficult work performed by the U.S. Coast Guard and the Marin County Coroner. So thank you to all these great agencies. And I don't think I have to tell this group how beautiful it is to be here at the bridge, even on a rainy day. And we also have to thank our neighbors and agency partners who help preserve this to be one of the most beautiful areas in the country. The National Park Service, the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, the Presidio Trust, and the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. We thank you for all your help and efforts over the years. Also wanted to acknowledge our former president, Janet Riley, could not be here. She was also one of the early advocates of this project, early on supporting adding additional patrol officers, which we did, and that did save lives. I also want to acknowledge Jim Eddy, another former board president, couldn't be here, but John Moylan could be here. John first joined our board in 1987. He hasn't been on that whole time. John's pretty good at politics. He's been on and off 3 or 4 times. We're very proud of him for those efforts. But when John joined the board, a local columnist called him in 1987 and said, well, what do you have in mind for being on the board? And John said, well, you know, I wouldn't mind getting one of those median barriers built out on the bridge, and we need a suicide deterrent. So, John, we're about to finish both of your goals from 30 years ago. And I also just want to acknowledge we do have our first Vice President, Sabrina Hernandez from San Francisco, IBW Local 6, and our second Vice President, Barbara Parr from Napa. So thank you for being here. So the advocacy was great, but of course we also needed some great political leadership. And it takes great political leadership to embrace new ideas and to get things done, and of course to get funds. About 5 years ago, this suicide deterrent project did not qualify for federal funds. There's certain, I don't have to go with this group about the rules of government, and we were fortunate to be in District 12, represented by Democratic leader of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who took the leadership and helped change federal law which provided the necessary funding for this project. We would not be standing here today without her leadership in the House of Representatives, and we also want to have special thanks to her great staff, too. Please welcome the Democratic leader of the United States House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi.
Good morning, everyone. What a bittersweet day this is. The joy of the prospect of saving lives, the sadness of those we have lost. Dick went through a long list of those who we should be grateful to, and we are. He actually gave my speech, so I will associate myself with his remarks in acknowledging all who did so much, from our friends in labor to Kimberly Renee and the families of those who are here, and everyone he mentioned. My friends, today we are here to observe a labor of love. Today belongs to the love and leadership of every family, like Kimberly Renee's and others here, every friend and loved one who turned out their grief into a powerful call for action to prevent suicide on our beloved bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge is a source of immense pride to the San Francisco Bay Area, but for far too many families in our community, it has been also a place of pain. Last year, 233 people came to the bridge to harm themselves. Thanks to the heroic, compassionate work of the bridge patrol officers and the men and women who staff crisis call lines, so many of you are part of, 184 were rescued. With this ceremony, we mark the beginning of construction on a deterrent system that will save countless more lives. The start of construction of this barrier is an achievement many years in the making. I accept Dick's comments on behalf of so many people who worked so hard to make that happen over time and in that particular appropriations. Of course, our great Senator Dianne Feinstein, a member of the Appropriations Committee and a leader in the Congress, and we will be hearing from, I want to acknowledge her, and also Senator Barbara Boxer, who was so much a part of it, who she and I at one point represented the bridge. She one half, I the other half. And now Jared Hoffman does, and we'll hear from him as well. I want to, though, also acknowledge Lynn Woolsey, who was so much a part of this over time. We know that it's a federal and state. Phil Ting is here to talk about the state's participation because some of our funds have to go through that route. Tom Amiano knows that. It's wonderful that you're here, Tom. But I'm proud to have been part of our Bay Area delegation in adding provisions to the 2014 Highway and Transit Bill that have allowed federal funds to be used for life-saving safety barriers and nets. We secured $125 million in pass-through federal funding to add this vital protection to our beautiful bridge. That was double what we had estimated when we started the fight, but things got more costly, the responsibility more urgent. So people would say to us, isn't that a lot of money for a net? And I'd say, no, it's not a lot of money for a life, for all of these lives that will be saved. Again, with the hard work of our partnership of Caltrans and Metropolitan Transportation Commission, the Golden Gate Bridge Board, General Manager Dennis Mulligan, we are moving forward. But of course, really, none of this would be possible without the families. Kimberly Renee will speak for the families. Thank you, Kimberly Renee, for being here, for the Gamboa family and so many others whom I have met and heard your sad stories. But she has been there, you have been there at meeting after meeting. You're here today so that we can thank you, because again, none of this would have been possible without the stories that you have to tell. And that we have to continue our conversations about mental health parity, funding for mental health, and all of those kinds of other issues. But today we want to remove one obstacle. You're using your grief to save other lives is really something I'm sure your family members whom you've lost would be very, very proud of. So we all thank you. Together we gather in the memory of every family member, and every family has lost a loved one on this bridge, and with the urgency of all we might spare from this suffering. Together we are providing a critical second chance, maybe more than that, for troubled young men and women and older acting on often impulsive thoughts. Together we are honoring a deep moral responsibility to save lives wherever and whenever we can. In this holy season of Easter and Passover, we recognize again and again that every single life is so valuable. Every one of them a spark of divinity, every one of them a child of God, every one of them precious, precious to us. Every loss, though it be in your family, is a loss to all of us. Together we are ensuring this magnificent landmark stands as a faithful companion for all San Franciscans, Bay Area, California, everyone who come here, awing and inspiring future generations to come, but not to identify it in any way with the tragedy that we have identified it with so far. Take great pride, each of every one of you, for your tears, your grief, your sadness, your lifesavers. Thank you. We're all in your debt. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leader Pelosi. Well, we're very honored to have the senior senator from California here with us today. She is all too familiar with this issue that we're involved with here today as a lifelong San Francisco resident and the former mayor of San Francisco, and her presence illustrates the importance of this issue. And when our contingent of folks were back lobbying in Congress for this, she and her staff met with us on several occasions and were very helpful in facilitating, also getting funds for this. So we are very pleased to have Senior Senator Dianne Feinstein.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. First of all, it's wonderful to be home. While Nancy was giving her excellent remarks, I was thinking back a little bit, and I was thinking back to my final year of mayor, when two things happened. As it's already been pointed out, I had the good taste to appoint Johnny Moylan to the board of this organization, and secondly, to preside over the 50th anniversary of the Golden Gate Bridge. And that was really a piece of work, because no one stopped people from pouring on the bridge. And the estimate was there were 1 million people on the bridge. And it came the middle of the day, and I was in the middle of the bridge. And the bridge, I've yet to figure this out, but the bridge has a way of being syncopated to the automobiles. And the fact that the pedestrians had a different movement to them, and there were so many of them, and I gotta tell you, there was so much weight there, that the bridge began to move in a very unique way. And so I said, who can shut this down? And I got back, I don't know. So I said, pass the word, shut it down, begin to move people off the bridge. And we did, and I want you to know that's a true story. So much for that time. My colleague, Senator Boxer, was mentioned, and I really want to pay tribute to her because she was chairman of something called the EPW Committee in the Senate, the Environment and Public Works Committee, and as such, she was able to get this project into a big transportation bill. So she did it, and I'd like to ask that you give her a big round of applause, please. There's someone that brought my attention to this in a very painful way. And the year was 1995, and his name was Dwayne Garrett. And Dwayne was a good friend of many of ours. He was a big supporter of mine. He was a supporter of Nancy's. He had a radio show. He sold art. He sold memorabilia of all kinds of professional sports. And he was what I would call a very going concern, a big booming voice. But none of us knew the other side. And so one day, he left a note in his car, and he said, the pressure is so great, I can't handle it anymore. And he walked out to the north span, and he jumped off the bridge. And it caused all of us to wonder how this would happen to this man who had a wife, 2 girls, lived in a beautiful house in Tiburon. It turned out it was financial. It turned out he was very proud. It turned out he had asked for help, but he couldn't ask for help anymore. It turned out that for some reason, personal bankruptcy was not something he could condone. And it turned out that he was obviously, seriously affected by his situation. And he went and did that. And for many years, I had to wonder why. And so there are many families here today that wonder why. And I don't think anybody should assume fault. I think it's part of our society. I think it's part of the lure of this bridge. People facing the great city of San Francisco go off on the easterly side for the most part. And so many people, and so many young people. So this net is a net whose time has really come. And so I want to thank all the monitors that go up and down every day on this bridge that prevent what might otherwise happen. So thank you so much. I'm very proud of what you've done. Thank you very much.
We are also very blessed, as most of us in this room know, to have such great members of Congress here in Northern California. And they all assisted in helping us get the funds necessary for this project. That included Congressman Mike Thompson and Congresswoman Jackie Spear, both of whom have their aides with us here today. Thank you for being here. Thank you, former Congresswoman Lynn Woolsey, as has already been mentioned, and of course, former Senator Barbara Boxer. But while the South Tower is in Leader Pelosi's district, the North Tower, has been noted, is in Congressman Huffman's district. So we also want to acknowledge the great work that Congressman Huffman did in helping us. We met with him several times, and he also helped facilitate getting these funds. So please welcome Congressman Jared Huffman.
Thank you, Dick. Well, I am so proud to be one of the representatives of this great old landmark behind us. I'm proud especially today because the Golden Gate Bridge is just as beautiful and iconic as it ever was, but it is constantly evolving to become safer and more reflective of our critical values and priorities. This day has been a long time coming. And you know, as a congressman, I spend a lot of my time in meetings. And I can't even tell you how many meetings I have in a given month, in a given year. But it's pretty rare that one comes along that really shakes you and changes you and haunts you. That's what happened in 2008 when one of my constituents, John Brooks, who's here with his wife Erica, came to visit me. And he's holding up a picture of his 17-year-old daughter, Casey. But John came to tell me his story, a story like so many of the surviving families here today. And he told it so bravely and so calmly, so with such poise. And I just turned to mush. I mean, I, like many of you, can't even imagine the pain that these families have gone through. But I think John knew then and there that he had a convert, and from that moment on, I have been a big supporter of this suicide prevention barrier, which would not happen without these incredible families and the way they've taken their pain and grief and turned it into purpose and stayed focused with that purpose with incredible patience, because this has taken a long time, and with incredible resolve. So politicians, you know, get the limelight in these moments. We get the speaking roles generally in these ceremonies, but make no mistake, we would not be here today. This would not be happening but for these incredible survivors who are here. So let's just pause and thank them one more time. Now, as important as this is, we know that this is only part of the challenge we face with suicide. Unfortunately, the numbers are going the wrong way for us on suicide. We're actually seeing an uptick in suicide attempts and in suicides here in the Bridge and around the country. And unfortunately, those numbers are going further down in the age group. So we're seeing younger teens begin to fall into this demographic. Suicide is now the third leading cause of death between people 16 and 24 years old. So we've got a lot of work cut out for us, and I know that when Leader Pelosi and Senator Feinstein and I go back to Washington, we're going to keep working to do more, to do much more to reform our broken mental health system. And I just, in my brief time with you, want to give a couple more shout outs, because many people have been recognized, many people have played a heroic role in trying to reduce suicides here on the Bridge and in bringing us to this moment. But it's important to recognize the Marin County Coroner and the United States Coast Guard for the role that they play. It's a grim role many times, but because of their responsiveness, they too have been lifesavers in some of these situations. So thank you to all of you. Thanks especially to the Coast Guard and the coroner who haven't been mentioned. I'm honored to be with you and so proud to be taking part in this important milestone.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning John and Erica Brooks. They have been regular attendees at our board meetings over the years and have been very heartwarming in their comments, and thank you. We are now going to get to a survivor family. As has been noted, this would not have happened without them. Our next speaker lost her son, 18-year-old Kyle, in September of 2013. And she or her husband, Manuel, have attended every one of our board meetings since that time and have spoken and have educated new board members and have educated all of us. And Kimberly, Renee, and Manuel have been just been very inspiring to all of us at the board. And so please welcome Kimberly Renee Gamboa.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Kimberly Renee Gamboa. And this is my 18-year-old son, Kyle Emerson Gamboa. And like Dick said, Kyle jumped off the bridge on September 20th, 2013. He was just starting his senior year at high school at Sacramento Waldorf School. Kyle is what led us to the journey to the Golden Gate Bridge to ask why and how suicide could happen here, and how to prevent future suicides at the Golden Gate Bridge. When Kyle died, the movement for a suicide barrier at the Golden Gate Bridge had been ongoing for many years. We, my husband Manuel, and myself just got involved and helped as much as we could. We had help from many before us that had lost loved ones to the Golden Gate Bridge. I want to thank John Bateson, the author of The Final Leap, that answered so many of my questions about suicide and the Golden Gate Bridge when I desperately needed to know how and why suicide could happen here. The Bridgewell Foundation, that was referenced in The Final Leap, where Dave Hull answered my email on how I could help with the suicide barrier and suggested I attend a Golden Gate Bridge district meeting. Either myself or Manuel, or both of us have attended every meeting since November 2013. Thank you, Bridgewell Foundation and all of its members. Kevin Hines is a survivor of a suicide attempt at the Golden Gate Bridge, and he has dedicated his life to help thousands find the light in the darkness and help people to cope with mental illness and suicide, and he has been a great support. Dana Whitmer, a Bridgewell Foundation member that helped immensely in starting a petition for a suicide barrier through change.org. We received over 158,000 signatures from all over the world in support of a suicide barrier, and many stories of lost loved ones to the Golden Gate Bridge were submitted to us. I'd also like to thank the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and their overwhelming support and help in funding the Suicide Barrier Project. Manuel has attended a couple of meetings, and they have been very supportive. Mark Prado from the Marin Independent Journal. He was the first one who told our story of Kyle and helped gain media attention to the Suicide Barrier Project and suicides on the Golden Gate Bridge. I also want to thank the Golden Gate Bridge Survivors Group in providing compassion and support for survivors, especially when you don't know what to do after this happens. You're just in such shock. I'd also like to thank Dana and Candy Houston. They host an event called Names in the Sand every year that honors all that have lost lives to the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's pretty much open to all, and it's been a very nice support every year that we can get together and meet new people and reminisce with others that have been going for a while to the meetings. Also, Erica and John Brooks for all their efforts in educating youth and public on suicide and mental illness. And Mia Menair and Sonia Hayes and their group, the Bridge Watch Angels, and their extraordinary efforts in preventing suicides on the Golden Gate Bridge. And I'd also definitely like to thank the dedicated board members and staff of the Golden Gate Bridge who have been incredibly supportive, compassionate, extremely knowledgeable, resourceful, and creative in pushing the Suicide Barrier Project forward and making it happen, along with currently increasing their efforts in preventing suicides at the Golden Gate Bridge. And there's many more individuals and organizations who have worked tirelessly to make a suicide barrier at their Golden Gate Bridge a reality. And last but not least, I'd like to thank all of Kyle's friends and family who are in this with all of us. Today marks the beginning of the end of suicides on the Golden Gate Bridge. Soon, no family will experience the devastation and tragedy of a suicide on the Golden Gate Bridge. Thank you.
Well, we've covered the federal government and a few other things, but we also have to recognize that we needed more money than just the federal government. So we went to the state. 12 years ago, this board, as I mentioned, didn't support the suicide net, and when Tom Amiano was on the board, he gradually started educating people about the need for this and was a lead, and you'll hear more later on about his leadership in getting funds from MTC. But it was important that we essentially garner state funds to supplement the budget that we needed for this project. This project received $7 million in state mental health funds, which at the time was unprecedented. We acknowledge former California Senate President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg, California Senator Mark Leno, who was a member of our bridge board at one point, and as I mentioned, Tom Amiano regarding that. And we also thank State Senator Mike McGuire and new State Senator Scott Wiener, who served on our bridge board and MTC, as well as Assemblyman Mark Levine. Our next speaker, who is a friend of the bridge, is the current chair of the Budget Committee member. Please welcome Assemblymember Phil Ting.
Thank you, Dick. Let me again just thank Kimberly Renee for your amazing story. And again, I know Representative Huffman mentioned this, but to all the families, I think your stories, your sacrifice, your tireless advocacy have really led us to this place. I also wanted to thank Dick and the Bridge Board and Dennis and his team for his leadership. We are all just stewards of this national treasure. And I know that at times we've had to struggle with how do you preserve this amazing symbol for our city, for our state, for our country at the same time while providing more and more safety in a modern society. The medians were an amazing change for automobile traffic, and now we move to preventing suicides. And Leader Pelosi talked about it, that when you actually have a solution that you know will work, it's a very rare opportunity for those of us in public policy. It's very rare that you actually have an answer. And in this situation, we absolutely did have an answer. We just needed to see the will and to find the way. It is really because of her and Senator Feinstein and really the advocacy of our leadership in Washington. But really at the state level, it was my former colleague, Assemblymember Amiano. He was the beacon of light in our legislature. And he was the one who was the moral voice. Too often you hear about numbers. You hear about lives lost, how much money it costs, these trade-offs. And I don't think when we have a solution that's so obvious, that is something that is so preventable, that we can't take the opportunity to do it. So I was proud to serve with him and watch him in action. And as a legislature, we were very honored to be able to be part of the solution to help get this deterrent over the final finish line. And I can't wait till come back here in a couple of years to actually see this amazing net get built. Because I know you can't really see it from far away. You have to be pretty up close. So we'll be back again to really celebrate that so we can pay honor to all the memories of the families, to all of you, and to all your loved ones. That's the best way we can honor them, is to get this done. So again, thank you so much for your advocacy, and thank you for helping us really take care of this amazing bridge.
Thank you. The next two speakers, and we are getting close, the next two speakers represent the organizations that gave us the federal money for the steel net. The first, California Department of Transportation, commonly known as Caltrans, provided $70 million in funding through their local bridge program. $70 million. We thank them for that. We thank their staff in District 4, the environmental, legal, local assistants, and many of their divisions. They were very, very helpful. And again, we couldn't have done it without Caltrans. Please welcome our next speaker, Caltrans Director of the Bay Area Office, Bijan Sartipi.
Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here to help celebrate the start of construction of an important project, one with the sole goal of saving lives. Let me begin by, first of all, recognizing and thanking and congratulating the families who are here, and also congratulating the Golden Gate Bridge District, its board of directors, past and present, and of course, the general manager of the board, a friend of mine, Dennis Mulligan, for all of the impressive work that they've done to get this project to this very important milestone. Let me also thank my staff, our local assistant staff, our environmental staff, our right-of-way staff, and legal. Dan McElhenney, our chief deputy, Mark Schindler from our right-of-way, our legal staff is here, Sylvia Fong from our local assistant who process all of these projects, and others who are here. And I also see our members of our Federal Highway Administration team that are here. Would you please stand up and be recognized for the work that you've done? This is the result of the hard work that you have done, and it's great to be here to actually see this. This was a long and often difficult project, one that brought a number of partners from all levels of government, as you saw, from the state, the federal, and also from the private sector to get us here. As is the case with all of other projects that we work on, aside from all of the technical issues, this was one of difficulty with the policy matter and also one of funding. And we were pleased to be a funding partner early on in the process and also help close the shortfall toward the end to make sure that this project actually get to construction with the help of approximately $70 million of our Highway Bridge Program funds. I'm sure that at times some would have wondered if the project would ever come to fruition, but it did because of everyone who knew that suicide deterrent system and the other measures that the Golden Gate Bridge District already implemented were vital and very important. Obviously, if these measures just saves one life, that answer all of the obstacles and all of the long and hard hours that everybody has worked on worthwhile. Just one life. But this will certainly do a lot more than that. Once again, congratulations to the Bridge District, to their staff, to the private sector consultants who worked on this project. It's been great to be part of this. And again, thanks to all of the families for being here and also including us in this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our final speaker is from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which, as you've already heard, was invaluable in providing the funds over the years, providing millions and millions of dollars in funding, and provided the early studies to get it going. We also want to thank MTC's Executive Director, Steve Heminger, who's been very supportive. He couldn't be here today, but we've thanked them. And his great staff who did the behind the scenes on the financing plan, Alex Bockelman, Ann Richmond, and Ross McEwen. So I'd like to introduce the Metropolitan Transportation Commission Chair, Jake McKenzie, who's also the Mayor of Roanoke Park. So.
Those of you who know me will be wondering what the hell I'm about to say. And I know quite a few of you in this audience. There's a lot of you I don't know. But one thing I can tell you is that my first memories of the Golden Gate Bridge go back to 1963, a beautiful September day. I was 25 years old. I was a graduate student from that excellent educational institution known as Oregon State University, go Beavs. And I came across the Golden Gate Bridge, and it was just like it had been portrayed on the albums of jazz music that I'd read about and listened to. It was just like the photographs that I'd seen back in Scotland. An amazing thing. And for the rest of my life, basically, I've been going back and forwards across this bridge. But that weekend when I was here, there were a bunch of Mackays that had settled in Marin County in Kentfield Woodlands. And one of them was doing his not national service, that's a Brit term. He was drafted into the Coast Guard. And he served over there at the Coast Guard station that still sits there over by Crissy Field. And I was talking to him, and I said to him, well, what is it that you do? You know, you go out and rescue people. And that was when his face kind of went a wee bit gray, and he said, one of our duties is to go over to the Golden Gate Bridge and retrieve people who have jumped. And I had no idea at all because it wasn't talked about. So I'm dedicating my remarks this morning not to Cousin Mackay, who first initiated me into the horrors of these stories, but to Jonathan Glass, a young man from Sonoma County. I first met him in an open space district walk. He worked for Land Paths. He introduced thousands of young people and adults to the joys of being in the great outdoors of Sonoma County, this magnificent place where we live. And Jonathan Glass took his life in 2013. So in his memory, and dedicated to his wife Amy and his daughter Eden Ray, I make these few remarks. It almost seems crass at this time to talk about how the money that we contributed to this deterrent system, but those of you who are elected officials, those of you who are staff, those of you who follow politics know that you can establish a policy, but you implement it through the budget. We've heard about this both from the federal and the state level today, just how important that is. And I was introduced, and my staff I say my staff, that's a very crass thing to say. Our staff from MTC was part and parcel of that process. So I'd like you guys to stand up. You've already been named. Don't be shy. Come on. And where's Randy Rensler? He's somewhere about. There you go. All of you who also serve on boards and commissions know where the work is done. And it was a lot of work, and it was heavy lifting, and you've heard about that. And so we were and continue to be delighted to be part of this, to get us to this day. And the last thing that I'm going to tell you, there's a guy in our midst today with blue hair. Who would have thought? A guy with blue hair. Stand up, Tom Amiano. Come on. There's obviously no need for him to be shy, is there? I mean, but I got the data on you, Amiano. 14 years as a San Francisco supervisor, 12 years as a Golden Gate Bridge district director, 8 years as an MTC commissioner, 6 years as a state assembly member. All of these are your former titles, but the title that you will never relinquish is champion of the Suicide Deterrent Project. It's always grand to be the last speaker following on a list of distinguished, what were we called? Oh, announced as a very important speaker. So as the last of the very important speakers, I bid you farewell, and I thank you all for being here today, and let's go and plant whatever the hell we're supposed to be planting.
Thank you. Mr. Distinguished Commissioner. I do want to acknowledge just a couple other people. That funding plan, as you can imagine, was quite a challenge. And it's actually, to those of us who serve on the board, we were unbelievably impressed with how it's done. And it wouldn't have happened if it were not for the great work of our general manager, Dennis Mulligan. Dennis, please go ahead. I also want to acknowledge another very important person out here at the bridge, and that is our district engineer, Ava Bauer, who will be really responsible for monitoring this. And thank you to Ava and her staff for great work. And the final comments have to deal with this has to be built, so who's doing it? We want to thank our contractor who's going to build it, which is Shimmick Construction and Danny's Construction. I believe we have them from here, Shimmick CEO Paul Kakatis, also Chris Fasari, and Moto Baba. Where are you folks? Please stand. Thank you. On that note, we hope that we'll be back here in January of 2021. Pardon? That's right. Very good point. The Friends of Labor will be building it. So thank you. Thank you. When this bridge was originally constructed, it cost $35 million. They spent $1 million to put up a net to help the workers, and it did save 19 lives. Now we're constructing a net to protect all life here at the bridge. That first net was made of rope. This one will be made of stainless steel, made in America, and will be a permanent part of the Golden Gate Bridge. So we are hopeful, and we are very much, we have a committee monitoring this, and we hope to be back here to celebrate the completion of this project in January of 2021. We thank you all for being here, and thank you all for your support. We do want to ask that the speakers and the press to adjourn outside very briefly to the tent where there's going to be a planting ceremony.